The sin and suffering in the world these last few weeks has brought fear and frustration. And with the summer heat, it has also brought us family and friends, stressful expectations, and for many All Sainters, the all-consuming and distracting summer fair. We, like Martha, become distracted from all that has to be done. And we, like Martha, get discouraged when the Salvation Army doesn't come and empty out the shed to make putting the tables up easier. When people are too busy to cover thrift shop shifts and Lord & Taylor has to close early. And when truckloads of usable goods get carted away to the dump following the fair. We, like Martha, want to cry out to Jesus saying, "Lord, doesn't any of this bother you?" And we tend to blame and judge, wondering why so-and-so did or didn't do X, Y, and Z. We struggle to juggle our busy calendars and our commitments, and we get distracted by busyness, fear, and frustration. Lord, doesn't any of this bother you? Then in the midst of it all, we come to worship and we seem to hear Jesus say, "Martha, Martha, calm down. Why can't you be more like your sister?" Because we get caught up in broken family systems, power dynamics, and dysfunction that serves no purpose other than to distract us from the comfort and from the peace we so desperately need from Jesus. In the midst of my searching for something positive to say, given the Martha and Mary text from Luke today, I read a great piece of wisdom from my favorite Presbyterian, Frederick Buechner, pastor and writer. He happened to celebrate his 90th birthday on Monday of this week. Fred writes, "The world is full of dark shadows, to be sure, both the world without and the world within, and the road we've set off on is long and hard and often hard to find. But the word is trust. Trust the deepest intuitions of your own heart. Trust the source of your own truest gladness. Trust the road. Trust him. The knowledge that what's lost is nothing to what's found, and that all the dark there ever was set next to the light would scarcely fill a cup." The world this week certainly seems to have had more shadows of sin and scarcity, from upheaval in Turkey to carnage in France. It follows another week when we wonder about whose lives matter. Last week we learned from the Good Samaritan that the lives of our neighbor matter. And this week we wonder if it is Martha or Mary, and which one matters more. If we think the story in Luke favors Mary, we're saying that Jesus discounts service, which if you read the Gospel of Luke, makes no sense at all. And if we think it favors Martha, we're saying that it's all about service that matters. And clearly both matter to Luke and to Jesus. But you and I, we have this tendency to wrap our own self-worth in the roles that we play, in our perceptions about how others value us. We want the better part. We want to matter. We want to be seen as worthy. This raises a bunch of questions for us. Where does your worth come from? Whom do you see as worthy? How do you see yourself? How do you see others? And there are times that I wonder if we are like the people who walked across the street in the Good Samaritan story. And there are times even when I wonder if we see others at all. In the dark shadows of sin and suffering and the scarcity of trust, our fears and frustrations weigh on our hearts. What lives do we see and find as worthy? This is the very heart of the Gospel of Luke, where instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus says Samaritan lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus says children's lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus says Gentile lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus says Jewish lives matter. Instead of saying all lives matter, Jesus says leopard lives matter. And in the Martha and Mary story, again crossing boundaries and borders, Jesus says women's lives matter. It seems to me that the heart of the Black Lives Matter movement is this plea. It is a request. It is a demand to be seen as worthy, to be treated with equality, to point out to a larger culture that acts as if some lives matter less than others, that Jesus constantly afflicts the comfortable, that Jesus comforts the afflicted. And he does this by lifting up the disenfranchised and oppressed lives of all people whom others seem to have less worth, because those groups of people matter. Beloveds, when we judge and see others' worth as a matter of who's in and who is out, we live in fear and frustration. We pull out our guns and shoot out of sin and scarcity of trust. And we build a world and a culture that constantly draws lines between who's in and who's out, who counts and who doesn't count, who is worthy and who is not. And you've heard me say this again and again, and it's clear from Luke's gospel and throughout all of the New Testament, whenever we draw a line excluding others, Jesus is always where the other is. When we draw that line, Jesus we find on the other side of it. Beloveds, Jesus' words to Martha this day were not judging or scolding. They were instead an invitation. They were an invitation for her to see herself as Jesus sees her, beloved and worthy. They were an invitation to see the same opportunity that Mary had to sit at the feet of Jesus. And they were an invitation to see those same possibilities in others, especially all those who experience that their lives don't matter, all those who don't sense that they are equal children of God. All of those are invited to be disciples, both Martha's and Mary's, both you and me. New Testament scholar Caroline Lewis says, this is a story about pointing out what is possible, what God wants to be possible. That those that we deem unworthy for the role of disciple are those that Jesus insists are more than qualified. Our certainty about the criteria for discipleship, Jesus seems to upend. Is it service or sitting? Is it hospitality or listening? Is it attentiveness or learning? Or all of the above? This is a story about the fact that even Mary, even a woman, even those we have deemed outside of God's grace can imagine themselves as disciples. The story has nothing to do with who's better and everything to do with who matters. The story is not preoccupied with proper acceptance and has everything to do with whom you accept. I find that this is an indictment on all of how we judge, on all of what we see as right and wrong, in and out, worthy and unworthy, all of which we find in our world as racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia and all of the other ways that we exclude and devalue. And I wonder if we are able to confess the words of our psalm this day. O Lord, who may abide in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy hill? Those who walk blamelessly and do what is right and speak the truth from their heart, who do not slander with their tongue and do no evil to their friends, nor take up a reproach against their neighbors. The good news this day is that light is brighter than the shadows of sin and suffering and scarcity of trust. The good news this day is that our God of forgiveness and abundance invites us all, the distracted and the discouraged, the fearful and the frustrated. God invites us all to the waters of life, to the tables of grace, and to sit at the feet of Jesus the Christ, to be fed and forgiven, and to see our worth regardless of those who don't value our lives as mattering or see us as beloved children of God. That invitation is yours. That invitation is eternally yours.